Please welcome Adam and Ruben.
Thank you, everyone. There's only one mic here, and they didn't have any lav mics, and Ruben and I figured we're pretty loud anyway, so if you don't hear us, put up your hand. We're here to talk about new media use changes during the customer life cycle. And a few things to just throw out. We thought we'd, instead of just sitting there introducing ourselves again, we'd throw out some stats. So how many of you know that over 50% of Canadians are comfortable meeting and communicating with people through social media today? 1 in 3 Canadians have social networks with 150 people or more. 1 or 4 share links with friends and colleagues via email and sharing tools.
What we've done here is just broken down some of the trends. So if you look at who's reading Facebook daily, reading the Facebook news daily, one of the leading segments in a system of Canadians is a segment called single city renters, so not surprising, young urbanites. One of the trends that we're seeing, who the laggards are typically tend to be older, small town people, and in French Canada, the pickup on Facebook is really low. But we're also seeing some big changes over the last year. Cluster 1, which is called Cosmopolitan Elite, the Rosedale crowd, they're seeing the biggest change. You're seeing a lot of movement in terms of pickup on Facebook, and we're seeing a bit of a tipping point happening, which we'll get back to in a second.
And that leads us into the fact that 40% more Canadians are open to receiving relevant marketing messages than they did last year. It's a really kind of interesting fact.
And again, if we unpack that a little bit, interesting to see here that you're seeing a lot of the affluent, well-educated city people are picking up on recognizing that marketing messages are going to come through social media. The leader in that are young singles who live in apartments. A lot of them are university students. 31% of them are open to marketing messages, and they were the biggest change over the past year. So what we're seeing happening here is a lot of Canadians are really not open to this idea yet of getting marketing messages through social media. But for some Canadians, it's starting to hit that tipping point, and it's just starting to move very quickly. So this is one example with these young singles.
And 1 in 4, as it relates to what you'll see in our case study today, 1 in 4 Canadians seek recommendations and suggestions when making health-related product purchases, which in itself is not that great a step, but you'll see why we're bringing that up.
And if we unpack this a little bit, this is actually a little bit of a narrower measure of who's using, how frequently people are using social media for recommendations on health purchases. We're actually seeing a little bit of a different kind of trend here happening. It's an older crowd. It's a more affluent crowd. The Rosedale types who are trying to be on the leading edge, they're quite trendy, they're fairly tech savvy. They're showing a big change. They're starting to go to social media as well in big numbers. So while they're not open to receiving marketing messages, they're actually going for specific items that are of interest to them, like health purchases. You see some of the other older people who are still lagging in this area. So really the key takeaway from some of this is it really depends who you're talking to in terms of their openness to social media. So what we've just shown you are some results from the latest survey on asking Canadians on social media and digital behaviors. These are results from December. And what we've done is we're just in the process of updating this information with the PRISM database from Environics Analytics, which will tell you just a little bit more about in terms of how that works. But between these results, it really helps you try and understand what's happening in the world of social media, digital behaviors, and unpacking those trends. I'm Ruben. I'm from Environics Analytics, as we were introduced earlier. And Adam, my colleague, is at Delinea, which is a strategy shop in terms of social media. Environics Analytics, if you don't know, is we're the people who you look up your postal code and we can tell you your horoscope and stuff like that. Kidding. We can look up your postal code and tell you about your demographic characteristics of your neighborhood and propensities for different behaviors and values. So we were having a conversation, and Adam and I, and one of the things that we were kind of discussing is the take-up of social media among our clients. And I was having a sneaking suspicion clients were coming to us and saying, yes, we want to know about social media because they're supposed to know about social media, right? So they were wanting to understand more about social media and how, who's doing what on social media. I always had this sneaking suspicion that the information that we were providing wasn't necessarily being turned into some kind of action. And Adam, I don't know, what would you say about your experience?
Well, the interesting context is our firms really came together last year. The data in there in terms of the stats, have been running for the past 6 years our digital profiling surveys against our panel. We collect 20 to 25,000 completed surveys, and that's what drives the linkage to the PRISM stuff. And when we sit there and see the trends and the changes in what's going on in social media, what we are challenged up by as a firm is that we get a lot of clients there saying, we don't have much money to do the social media stuff. We have a really tight timeline, and we want to push out this project. And we're sitting there going, but it's going to fail. Well, and we can tell you it's going to fail. And what we're trying to do, what Ruben and I were talking about, is that the fact that so many clients are just rushing headstrong into implementing social media strategies or implementing social media campaigns. We've both been sort of sharing our frustrations in terms of how do we turn their heads around, because we do have this powerful tool that we've developed together.
So how do you connect social media data with customer information that allows you to actually develop a strategy? That was a thing. I mean, people were not taking all this information and using it strategically to actually develop their social media strategy in a way that was going to appeal to a specific market or achieve a specific goal. That's a broad generalization. I'm sure there are people out there who are doing it effectively, but our experience was that the majority of our clients were not. So what we decided to do was to try and solve this problem, and we called on a shared client of ours, Canadian Blood Services, partly because when you're the blood supplier of record for the country, or at least for English Canada, there's no competition, so they're willing to share whatever they do. So we thought they'd be a good example to try and bring the data they have on their customer loyalty, customer life cycle, and look at some of the social media patterns that are inherent in their donor base to actually strategize and come up with a segmented approach towards social media to see what we could come up with what we had on the table here. So before I even go further, I just want to acknowledge Canadian Blood Services and their generous, okay to use their information to show you this today. So just to give you a little bit of context on Canadian Blood Services, what's happening in Canada is that our large urban areas are growing in population. I think we're all we understand that. A lot of smaller markets are declining or stagnant. The thing that's happening with CBS, though, is that the populations that are driving population growth are not the people who tend to donate blood. Okay, obviously, we all hear about growth in multicultural communities. What's happening in Canada is that the multicultural communities that are growing don't have traditions of giving blood. So there's an education that needs to happen. There's an engagement that needs to happen among new Canadians to donate blood. The big cities in Canada actually import blood, and I guess I use that term in quotes, but they actually import blood from smaller markets. Toronto can't sustain itself with the blood donations that come out of Toronto. We have to take blood from smaller markets all over the place. Because in those smaller markets, that's where you find the traditional blood donors in Canada. But as I mentioned, those small markets are aging, they're not growing, and the people who are donating blood in those markets are going to become the people who need the blood in the very near future. So this is the challenge that CBS is faced with.
And the reason we thought working together or trying to come up with some sort of interesting solution for them just on our own was because, one of the questions that Ruben had said with his clients, we developed and launched our intersection of our Asking Canadians data with the PRISM stuff last March. And we sat there and was trying to understand why weren't people using, his clients were loving it, the people who were using, but where was the uptake in terms of trying to stop themselves from running down a particular path before they could? Because the tools are out there. And whether it's the tools that we've developed or other tools that are out there, the ability to understand how you use data to stop yourself from running down too quickly down a path is there. And this isn't the solution, but it's a great tool. And because we had already had an experience working with CBS, back in 2006, we helped them launch what was called the Operation lifeblood program, where we used digital technologies to engage people who had been donors to share their stories about giving. And it was a pilot project that ended up running nationally, and their success was that they ended up, it was, you know, they had a conversion rate of about 16% instead of 10% with that, which was quite a, we thought it was a modest target, but clearly that's what their expectations were. And because the fascinating thing with this, we had done months of research before we came up to understanding the behaviors to drive this project. And what I find in the social space, which I mentioned, we don't have that luxury anymore. People want to know the answers, or they want to barrel down the path and just do it. So we came at it from a great perspective in terms of our experience working with CBS from a digital standpoint, because we saw that they like to understand data, but at the same time they were faced by all the pressures everyone else was.
And Adam, you know, I should probably add that they've had a strategy of obviously engaging more social media, just like probably many people in the room have had. But they dabbled fairly early with some special microsites that would allow people to post videos and things like that in terms of reasons why they give blood, to try and engage new donors in a different way and younger donors in a different way. So, putting it all together, can social media help with recruitment and retention for Canadian Blood Services? And the other question we were going to ask is, can we do all this in a day? Can we put it together quickly to move at the speed of social media? So that's where Adam and I started. So, me being the data geek, I started digging into, with some help from my colleagues back at the office, we started digging into the donor patterns of Canadian Blood Services. And again, this is a bit of an eye chart here, but we created a profile. Just very quickly, what this is with a postal code we can attach segments to prism clusters, I should say, to each of the donors. So it's based on the sociodemographic characteristics of where the donors live. So in absence of having all kinds of information on those donors individually, which we have some, we know how many times they donate. We know their age, we know where they live, we know their gender, etc. We can attach other sociodemographic characteristics to make inferences about who those populations are. So what you're looking at in the middle of this is a profile. So the bars going off to the right are the clusters that have a higher propensity to be new donors, and the bars going off to the left are segments that have a low propensity to be new donors. So just to kind of contrast, we've just sort of picked a few clusters here. On the left, you're seeing some new donor clusters. So these are clusters that tend to have a lot of new donors in them. So segments like Asian up-and-comers, South Asian society, old world style, and rooms with a view. So these are all multicultural urbanites, big city people, younger segments. They tend to have the new donors. The established donor segments are people like Rods and Wheels, Golden Ponds, Down on the Farm, Big Sky Family. So quite evocative in terms of who you're seeing in the different donor life cycle. So what we did is we divided up the donors into these two groups, tending to be new donors, tending not to be new donors. And then we also looked at their loyalty profile. So we looked at lapse rates, because we have 10 years of history of data here to actually track this stuff. And we found that, once again, I mean, on the left side, you see some segments that tend to have high lapse rates. Some of them coincide with the first group. They tend to be the new acquisitions, but they also tend to have high lapse rates. And then the loyal donors on the right tend to be some of the more older and small town type markets. So what we did is we took the classic approach, put these two profiles on a quadrant, and all those little dots are each of the prism clusters. What you're seeing at the top are people who tend to lapse. What you see at the bottom, what you see to the right are people who tend to be new donors. And those colors on there represent urbanity. So the red dots are urban. So you can see that urban donors tend to not be very loyal. And the greens and the purples down at the bottom are more of the small town and rural type donors. So when we put it all together, the four segments, actually Adam, maybe if you could just flip back for a second. The four segments, maybe not.
There you go.
Doesn't, oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. Just impatient. So the 4 segments that we created are the new lapsers, so people who tend to come and leave quickly. They'll maybe give once and then you don't hear from them again. The lapsers, who are segments that tend to, they don't have particularly high rates of donation, but they're lapsing, they're losing them at high rates. Okay, so they're not particularly new segments, they're not new donors necessarily, but they tend to have high lapse rates. At the bottom, on the bottom right, you've got the new loyals, so newly acquired donors who tend to come from clusters that are loyal over time. And then the established loyals. Those are the traditional donors who come, month in, month out, and they'll give blood. So just to kind of summarize what each of these segments is about, what we did is we ran some information on each of these segments on demographics, and we looked at their social values. Because when Adam and I were talking about this, we thought that social values are going to be a driver in communications and messaging. The social values data is collected by Analytics Research, which is our sister company, and we've linked it up to these segments. So we're able to then hive off the new loyals in this case and look at those, there's 85 social values, and look at what floats to the top and what's at the bottom of those lists in terms of the strength in those values. And that allows us to feed into some of the communication, the positioning around those social values. So the new loyals, they tend to be comfortable suburban small-town families with school children. They tend to be very rational in their decision-making, so you got to make a case that's very rational for them. They tend to be very utilitarian. They don't like a lot of adornment. Just give them the goods. And family is very important to them, but they don't feel a strong sense of social responsibility. Okay, so they're not so worried about the people in society that are less fortunate than themselves. They're worried about keeping their family healthy and safe. And they're about 18% of the new donors. If we look at the new lapsers, these were overwhelmingly young multicultural households in big cities and the suburbs. So very different kind of demographic profile. They're still families, but given that a lot of these people are newcomers, they're feeling a little bit directionless, a little rudderless. They're trying to establish themselves in a new environment. They seek spirituality and direction in their lives. They're convinced by science, so a bit rational as well in terms of their decision making. They like novelty. They also find that their social responsibility we've found that their social responsibility is relatively low. So once again, they're not that worried about the people out there and their well-being. They're more concerned about their own well-being. But they also have a driving need to feel part of a group. They want to feel part of a common kind of group that they can connect with. So that's one of their drivers and motivators. The lapsers, these are young urban singles and couples. They have a very strong sense of social responsibility. They don't defer to authority, so they don't take well to being told what to do. They see a positive role for government, and aesthetics and novelty are important to them. And then finally, our established our established loyals are older blue-collar couples in small towns. These are risk-averse people. They have a strong sense of community. They're really driven by the places where they live. They know the grocery store owner, and they know the pharmacist, and all of that sort of thing. They're concerned about their legacy, and they are very proud Canadians. Okay, so that's quite a diverse group of people. And if you start thinking about how social media could interplay with all of these different audiences, a few things kind of bubbled up in my mind immediately. Like my first reaction was, we're not going to be going after them. Okay. My second reaction was that probably those new lapsers, those multicultural families, would probably be a really good audience to go after, just because of their sort of who they are. I mean, we've managed to attract them in to donate blood, but we're not keeping them. So what can we do to message them? And they're probably fairly tech savvy. I mean, if you look at the little picture we have on them, they're holding video games and stuff like that. And then the other two, the lapsers and the new loyals, maybe there's a role for them too. That's where this guy's kind of a good come up with his brain in terms of strategy. So Can social media help with recruitment and retention?
So this is where Ruben had done his work. It probably took him a total of 4 hours to do this. So that was a really interesting part, that he just took this stuff. They had the CBS data. He was able to apply thinking around the use of social values. Now, the nice thing about having access to him while I was doing it is because what I learned very quickly is you can't just look at one social value and then start making your decisions, because you can go down a whole path of who those people are, which is wrong. And when we were having discussions, we have a couple of folks that are from states versus Canada, and you know, their view of one of the segments was, you know, the classic Tea Party group, very strong opinion. But from a Canadian's point of view, once you looked at the other social values, it was really about more multiculturalism. So you really had to look at some of the social values. But where Ruben passed me over these 4 segments, it was really great, because a lot of what we do is, how do we create a persona before we do anything around creating a digital experience? But what we've done by bringing our data in and connecting it with the Prism stuff, now I can actually continue the analysis from a digital perspective, but really leverage the work that's being done. So just to put a little bit of context into things, the way we look at social, the way we look at any digital experience, it's all part of the customer journey. And when we find that a lot of clients are barreling down developing campaigns in social media or developing any digital campaign, without looking at it from the point of view of the customer experience, a lot of times you miss the nuances of how that medium is being used by that customer at that time. And what we continue to try to do is try to understand at what point is that customer connected with that experience through what medium. And this data, when we're looking at that from point of view, we're really kind of gathering how is it the message that's wrong? Many times especially in social media, a client comes to us with a message and saying, how do I reach this audience through this medium? But maybe the message isn't the right message for the medium. And that's why we were able to stop back and take a look at this. And when we first looked at the social media behavior and overlaid it with the segments that Ruben came up with, first of all, it established and validated, thankfully, that the established loyals were not the group to focus on. Now, not that, you know, there aren't perhaps some highly social savvy people in that group, but the realization, if you're doing any sort of experience design, you pick the groups that have the largest potential, and then you assume the others will get caught up. But what we saw was that there were, you know, 3 of the groups over-indexed in terms of their social behavior. So clearly social has a potential of connecting with these people and be used in some way with them. And then when we compared it with some of the social values, so what Ruben and what the CBS told us was really that there's 2 big social values that really drive a connection to giving blood. One is community involvement. So here we're seeing, when we map that against social behavior, well, the new lapsers were, you know, both high in their social behavior and high in their community involvement. So this is what I consider sort of the millennial group. Some of them are the, you know, sort of the anarchists and sort of bucking the trends, but they're highly social. They get behind the causes, but for some reason, they're not giving blood, which is really interesting, because if you want to take,
they're not sticking around.
They're not sticking around. Yeah. Sorry, they're not sticking around. And if you want to use the community involvement, it has a play with them, but maybe the message is wrong with them. What was an interesting point was the fact that community involvement really wasn't, and it was identified by Ruben earlier, that with the new loyals, it wasn't an important factor. So social media, in terms of using it to connect with new loyals, it's not about a sense of community there. Do you have a question?
Yeah. If you've decided that the established loyals have a high propensity to give blood and continue giving blood, then doesn't that mean that approaching that group with social media could bring in new established loyals? Even better propensity to
it's a great question. But our view is that is social media the best medium to connect with those people? And that's what, at this point, that question, you know, I mean, digging into it further, you might find, but at first blush with the data, because we're trying to find a quick perspective on this, our instinct was maybe a social campaign or a social program isn't for these people.
If you start unpacking the behaviors too on what the established lows are doing in social media, there's not a lot there to play with either. I mean, they're not doing that much. There might be some very, very small things that you can do that will appeal to them. You could do that, but I think the bigger piece on that particular group is demographically they're dying out. That's the challenge. They're tapped out there in those markets, and CBS wants to be getting the blood donations where they're required. They don't want to be shipping blood all over the country if they don't have to.
No, it's a good point, but I can see totally how social media really appeals to that group, but maybe social bigger group, they pass on the education to their families, to the next generation.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. So on that point, if we're, and you'll see as we go on, but they should get caught in a lot of the ideas coming out to engage the other groups would apply to them as well. So they're not excluded, but we wouldn't focus on them to design an experience for them.
Did your segmentation address which of the loyals are more likely to be net promoters of the program? In other words, the ambassadors together get to become new loyals.
You were looking at that. You've been talking about this. I think we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
Yes, because there are certain segments that are more likely to have that profile.
And they're not
to be
plans
advocates.
for us, by the way, asking these questions. No, they're great questions, and these are all the questions that were coming out when we first looked at it. On the other social value is social responsibility. So that strong sense of social responsibility about giving blood and supporting the blood supply. And lapsers were way out there in terms of social responsibility, which is not surprising by the profile that we've shown. But with new loyals and new lapsers, social responsibility really isn't an important value. So this is, once again, in terms of, if this is the traditional messaging that CBS wants to reach out to the marketplace, clearly to bring back the new lapsers using social media, that's probably not the message you want to use through that medium. So here's where we get into some of the stuff. Now, we pulled out 17 variables to analyze this in terms of, we have, we collect hundreds of variables on various digital behaviors, social, mobile, etc. But in terms of when we indexed the different segments, what we found was with the new lapsers, they are very connected. They're not only actively observing what's going on online, but they're actually participating, which is great to see. So they're an engaged group that is participating online. But then, as Rupen had said, this is young multicultural families that don't have a strong sense of social responsibility, probably feel a little bit insecure about their connection to the community at large, but they're looking for a sense of community. And them wanting to feel part of a group makes an interesting play for how you can approach social media. So the new lapsers, one of the ideas that we really recognize from this group is about, the new lapsers are about how do you connect? How do you connect with the community? And why does giving blood and participating, coming back to give blood, helping your community? So when we thought about it from a social point of view, this was more about education. This is more about getting them to share their experience. Some of the ways they're doing it, but not for the reason of just saying it to the world. The new loyals, they're not, I wouldn't say they're conservative in terms of use of social media. They do over-index, but they're much more passively involved. They're much more using social media to stay up on things. They're much more in terms of making sure that how it relates to them. And when you look at that in terms of their profile and their social values, it's really about, so if I give, how's this going to help my family? And I'm not trying to save the world, but if it affects me and the world around me, and what should we do? So when we thought about social media for these folks, it was really about keeping them informed about how they should give blood, when they should give blood, keeping up on how it and make sure it relates to them. So if they were trying to acquire more, it's about if we ran out of blood for your family, what would you do? But really, what we think that this is much more for these new laws. It's about retention because they've already participated, they're already getting involved, but they don't really the traditional social value messages that CBS has used to engage the established laws aren't really working for these. So that utilitarian attitude is really powerful in this instance to use social media in terms of, how do you convey that message in 140 characters? It's really about informing them that maybe the blood supply related to your family is low, so maybe you should give, or tracking what they're doing.
And one thing I just want to add, Adam, is that when you look, one of the things that they know as we've done the analysis with CBS is that there's a life stage factor that happens in the pattern of giving. People start having families, they get busy, they've got kids. I don't have time to go give blood. What am I going to do with the kid? All of that sort of stuff starts to happen, so that the giving sort of falls off in those early childhood years. So it's a question of keeping CBS top of mind with relevant reasons to connect with this group to keep them going. Now they're relatively loyal already, so they're finding the time compared to others to go and keep giving. But to really keep it top of mind and to keep them going, that's really important, and that's an important thing to bring to this, is that life stage element.
So that's where social media here is much more of a utility than it is a community-based thing. But what I found was really fascinating was the lapsers. And the reason the lapsers, so, everyone is focused on the millennials and really looking at that, and our firm as well, and how do you engage them. But these are they're very highly active in terms of the social media. Not only the use, but the participation in their social networks. And they do have a huge strong sense of responsibility. So I sat there and I was like, well, why is this not connecting with the messaging of giving blood? Because I've been to events these sponsored events by CBS, and when they're showing you the videos or telling you the stories, everybody in the audience is crying. You're holding out your arms. Where could we give to help? But it's not really resonating with this group. And one of the reasons is this group is really focused on immediacy. They want to participate and they're sharing amongst their networks, but everything is instant. What's happening today? Like, I just want to know. They're being bombarded by all the messages from their friends. So in terms of connecting with this group can actually become the advocates if the cause is right. So it's a bad thing to kind of try to say that you want to make giving blood sexy. But these are the same people that are really participating in, the runs for the cure and the various causes that they go out to their social networks to get people to support and participate. So in terms of the idea of reaching out and making it relevant to their communities, it's there. But the message here has to be very relevant to them. A lot of them are quite left in their thinking. It could be the messaging is about, I was riding my bike to work, I fell off it and I needed blood, and they didn't have my type, so, I learned my lesson and making it relevant to them. But what was fascinating with this group, because if this group can be tapped in, this is the future. And although CBS is always looking at how do you maintain and grow the new loyals, I think this is a group that you can nurture about the importance of giving blood if it's relevant to them, because as they go through their various life stages, their attitudes will change. And by connecting CBS with them at an early stage and making it relevant to them is important.
Well, I think the relevance, also the key thing there is giving them something to focus around. And then once again, just coming back to that whole life stage factor here, is that when you think about it, if you're in your 20s, the concept of, I should give blood because it's good for other people's health, they kind of get that, but it's not that immediate, right? You think you're in your 20s, you're healthy, you think, it's just not that immediate. So the heart-wrenching story that they might see on YouTube will hit them for a moment, but then they're on to the next thing. So they really need something that they can engage with and be focused on in an ongoing way, so that they will continue to give blood and not just kind of fall away.
Does your segmentation allow you to determine whether those lapsers are in fact the kind of people who only give when they hear that there's a dire shortage of blood right now, maybe be positive or whatever?
Right.
Could it be that sort of thing, if there's a constant reminder to them of shortages in particular blood types or whatever?
Right.
If they were, they want to be charitable. They're sort of event-driven.
Right.
There's a disaster. There's an earthquake in Turkey, whatever it might be.
Right.
And dire need for blood right now. It could be that kind of person.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. We have
we have the way to validate that afterwards. The point of this is that we're trying to quickly identify is this an area where we want to dig into, as opposed to what we're being faced on. The decision is already made. Let's implement that campaign. So by pulling it back, that's the next question once we identify. I think that would be one of the great questions on the lapsers, is that what's the cause? Like, what's the cause that you're getting them to support? Because you know if you can click into them with the cause, that will have a huge impact of the use of social media. So just to wrap up on this, because I know we're starting to run out of time, what the analysis really told us is that the messages that we basically looked at the point of, for new lapsers, it was really, new lapsers and new loyals, it was really about truly retention. And how do you re-engage them to make sure that or keep engaging them in using social media with the right message through the right medium. And especially with lapsers, how do you, it's almost a reacquisition campaign, and how do you use it with the right messaging? The other big challenge that you face when you're looking at this as the next step as we're looking, is that the way to convey a message in social media is a different experience. To convey a true social cause in 140 characters is a challenge in itself. So when you look at these sort of messages that we came up with and what you're trying to do with them, then you have to overlay the experience that they're going to have and at what point.
So just to wrap things up here, so we can. I mean, we found that you could connect social media data with customer information. We were able to challenge the social media strategy and the, I guess the biases that we know CBS has gone in with in terms of their social media strategy traditionally. Now, you know, they haven't implemented on this at this point. We've just done this in the last little while, but this does challenge where they've been going to think about it a little bit differently. So that's perhaps a case study for next year. I don't know. Yeah, we did do it in a day actually. So I mean, the benefit there is that if you've got good data on hand, and obviously you've got good data from the CBS database or a customer database that you want to link, and you've got good data that you can append to it, you can do this analysis quite quickly and react fairly quickly to things like, just as the gentleman in the back there mentioned, you know, if there was a case of a special need for blood, can you measure it quickly and react quickly and do something quickly? And yeah, you can do that and understand who it is that took you on.
And from our point of view at Delvinia, what this really told us was the fact that I can walk in, if I'm not feeling comfortable because of our experience or my staff's experience, that we think the strategy is not right, that we can quickly pull some data that we trust and that we know that can give a sound story to go in and perhaps challenge either the messages going through the medium or whether the medium is being used. So, and speed is of the essence for us. Thank you. Any questions?
I know you were talking about measuring this, I guess in the next year or so. Just anecdotally, do either of you have any experience in terms of like looking at this stuff in terms of like testing controls, like do a social media campaign, lapses versus hold up, what is the difference? I think for a lot of us, that's sort of the push comes to shove, what's actually happening. And it's very rare that I sort of see a company that says, yeah, here's what I've done. Test control, done that discipline, and then here's the incremental.
Exactly, and this is what I see this doing is now we've defined how you want to approach the control, because most of it's right into the implementation, or you've kind of identified the audience you want. Most of the time we're inheriting a message that's being pushed out there. So, but there's usually no budget to then wrap a control initiative around it.
No, I think it's great.
So this leads to the argument of, hey, let's try a control group and try it out before you go full up bore.
We took this on, we took this on of our own accord. Remember, that was the premise for this.
Yeah.
So because we were what we were seeing, so we wanted to do something that could be a
CBS
pilot.
may hate this, but what we really like it because we were able to challenge ourselves, and we didn't look at it because Ruben understands their thinking of how they're working so much today, and I was so confident in terms of the way the data was there to be able to identify. It sort of stopped us, and it's almost like we sit there going, why wouldn't everybody do this? Because if it only takes a day and can set you and make you think differently, we're constantly looking for the stories to tell people to stop back and think about it, and this might do it.
One more question, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.